Welcome back. Welcome back to Unfiltered Unspoken Podcast. Look, I see your smile. I love it.
I'm very excited.
Thank you. Welcome to Unfiltered Unspoken Podcast. And we told you we're going to continue to bring life experiences. We have another lovely guest, Philippa Scott, all the way from Australia. It is evening for us and it is morning for her. Welcome.
Thank you. Yes, it's not a very bright sunny morning this morning, unfortunately. It's winter here, so it's a bit cold and miserable, but it's lovely to be with you.
If you could tell us a little bit about yourself, a short introduction.
I'd love to. So I'm a mother of 4 daughters. I am a wife. I'm a grandmother to a little 1-year-old, and she is just beautiful. But my my work is all around birth and the prevention and the healing of birth trauma. So it is it's my world to help people enter into parenting or journey through parenting in an empowered way, and helping them get the information that they need to be able to do that. So, yeah, to keep it short, I'm a birth and parenting coach.
Well, thank you so much again for joining us this evening/morning. We always do appreciate it. Now, we always like to kick off our show with asking our guests about, the origins of their trauma and the earliest that they may have experienced it. So tell us a little bit about your childhood, your upbringing, and what was your home structure like?
Yeah, so I grew up as the eldest daughter of ministers. So my parents were ministers. They were traveling. My dad was a traveling evangelist while I was growing up, and it was an interesting upbringing. So my mother has a son who was adopted out before I was born, or after he was born. He's a few years older than me. My parents had a whirlwind relationship, and I was the oldest of then 3. I now have another younger brother who is my father and his new wife's son. And so it was a really interesting an interesting upbringing. We did lots of travel. With my dad traveling, we did 2 years in the States. I also there's a lot of neurodivergency in my family that's was and is undiagnosed for the most part. So I grew up in a house that was ever changing, lots and lots and lots of change, loads of schools. I think I had 15 schools in 13 years, and I was actually homeschooled for 4 of those years. So it was a very interesting, chaotic home life. And my parents obviously divorced at some point. It wasn't until I was 24 that they did that, but there was a lot of turmoil, unhealed trauma for my mum, obviously, with giving up a child. My dad had his own stuff. So yeah, it was an interesting childhood, to say the least.
Okay. All right. So we're going to dig into it because it sounds like you have a whole lot to give. Can you tell us some of the interesting pieces in your childhood? You said it was childhood that affected you as a child.
Yeah, I think there was one of the big things, interestingly, is how we did that travel piece. So for me, the travel, the being on the road was exciting. It was always about meeting new people. My sister experienced that quite differently to me. She found that far more traumatic, and it impacted her relationships. I tend to be very good at making friends, but I don't put the effort into a lot of long-term friendships. They tend to be, I tend to have only a few of those. So, but interestingly, I think one of the things that impacted on my birth, and it wasn't until after I had my own daughter that I understood this, but I had I was 2 weeks overdue, and they induced me. And when I was asking my mum about that, after I came to learn about how our psychology can impact how we give birth, I asked her, do you feel like with the pregnancy with me, because your previous child had been taken away at birth, do you feel like maybe whilst I was on the inside, I was safe and I wasn't going anywhere, nobody was taking me away, and so that's why maybe you didn't go into labor? Because with my other two siblings, it just happened really quick, and around the normal time. Not that 42 weeks is particularly late, but it was not it was a bit outside her normal compared to the other three. And she looked at me and she went, wow, yes, actually, that makes sense. And I'd never even thought about that before. Um, so yeah, I think the way that happened potentially created some stuff for me. What, I'm not sure. It's all been healed now, but growing up in a home with ministers means that you're often the example. um, how your parents are doing is often the example of how good they are as a minister, or you know I don't know, it's a bit of a goldenrod. And so I know when I would mess up, or when I wasn't happy, or when it was, when I would make normal mistakes like any teenager, it was taken personally by my parents. And it was something, particularly for my dad, that um, it was an affront to his reputation, how I behaved. And that's a lot of pressure for kids, and a lot of pressure on the parent-child relationship too.
Now, I can't recall how big, you said the family was, but um, did you suffer from what they call these days eldest daughter syndrome? Like having boundless responsibility, honestly, just being an extension of your parents before you should have been an extension of your parents. So did you deal with that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's actually interesting, in conversations with my sister as adults. I in my parenting of my own children, I've been really wary to not try and do that same thing. And I've said to my sister in the past, I didn't get a choice. You look at me and you just think I'm bossy, but I didn't actually have a choice. From the minute I was old enough to look after you, I was given that responsibility. As watch your sister, make sure you're looking out for her. She's your little sister. You've got to be the big sister. I said it wasn't actually something that I chose, and I've worked really, really hard to overcome that in my own family, and always having been aware. But the very first time I watched my sister say the same thing to her eldest daughter, I just had to laugh. I said to her, "You see, you just did it. You just placed her in a position of responsibility and authority, and she's only 3.5. You've just done that, and you're aware that it's a thing, and you rail against it as the second born. So like, we've got to be more aware of that, I think. But yeah, I definitely had that.
Okay. And so I guess I'm going to chime back into that. And because you said you felt when you were younger, if you did something wrong, it was taken personally. Um, how would it, and I guess that leads into not doing the same things. How was it taken personally? Like, and I guess what was the pressure on you?
Yeah, so I think when your parents are ministers, they're they're expected to have a perfect family. They're expected to have children who do the right thing and behave appropriately, all the time. And if they're not, then everyone in the congregation or the community looks to the minister and says, well, what are you doing wrong? Why aren't you, making sure that it's happening the way it should with your own children? How can you stand at the pulpit and say, this is what should be happening with our families, but you're not getting that right? And so for my dad in particular, And for my mum to some extent. For my dad, it was very much about, well, if my daughter's not, not getting the right grades, and I was, but I had, as a teenage girl at 16, I was also, wanting to have relationships with boys and other things. And so that was, as far as they were concerned, completely out of the question. And what I did reflected on their reputation and their personal brand. And so the pressure for them to make sure that I was, towing the line, but also the pressure for me to have to fit within this confine meant that I was molding myself for acceptance. And I lost who I was as a person because of that need to maintain that connection with caregivers, and that secure attachment. But I lost who I was as a result of that. So yeah, that I think is the big part of what that meant for me. And I ended up rebelling completely against all of that. And when it comes to my own parenting, one of the biggest things that came out of my own healing was an ability to accept my children, their decisions, and where they were at in their life for their decisions, where they're at, and what they need to learn, apart from me. It actually doesn't have anything to do with me. It's not a reflection on my abilities, on the way I parent, or anything else. If they make decisions about their life that I don't necessarily agree with, that doesn't mean that I made a mistake. I just have to love them through that. It's my job to provide acceptance, love, compassion, and an opinion perhaps on whether or not I think that there might be other ways for them to go, and give them ideas to explore. But it's not about me. It's about them, and that acceptance has made a huge difference.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I'm not sure what, the extent of, I guess, the ministry and what they were delivering and what they were preaching, but has your experience as, a minister's child, placed scars on how you feel about religion at all? Or, where was the church okay? Were you experiencing anything crazy at church, or was it just kind of straightforward and your faith is your faith type of thing?
Yeah, look, I think for me, my faith is my faith, and I practice that outside of the church for the most part, because it's actually really hard to find a genuine structured church home. I feel so. For me, my faith exists outside of a congregation and a flock, I suppose. But I grew up in the Salvation Army, so the Salvation Army is a very different church in lots of ways. There's lots of structure in some things, but the premise and the basis of the Salvation Army is that we look after people. We do the things that matter, that make a difference. So it's not just saying a prayer for somebody in need. It's getting them a blanket, getting them some food, and finding a space for them to have a warm shelter. So it's very proactive, and I love that. I actually take that into my everyday world, and it forms the basis of who I am as a person. I'm not just here to tell you. So, for instance, I had one of my clients I'm working with at the moment. She and her little one have been sick for weeks, and then all of a sudden her husband got sick and she's pregnant, and you know what? She lives a few minutes away from me. So I made a big batch of pumpkin soup, and I got one of my children to drop it off on their way out for the afternoon. And because that's a practical thing that I can do. It's not just about me offering words of encouragement. It's about me standing up and getting in my kitchen and going, what can I do to practically help this person? And that's a huge part of what drives who I am and how I operate in my business as well.
Okay. And so, I mean, jumping into the business, I want to ask, because you deal with prenatal trauma through pregnancies, and I'm assuming that would come from a personal experience that you have endured that trauma. Can you tell us a little bit about what pregnancy trauma is?
Yeah, so perinatal trauma can happen anytime from, IVF treatment or the conception phase right through to the first year or so after a baby is born. So that's the perinatal stage, is conception through to about a year. So it involves conception, pregnancy, the birth, and the postnatal recovery time. And any trauma in that space, and trauma can look different in that space for everyone. For some people, a very small number of the population, that trauma will be a catastrophic event, like a loss or major surgery, near death, those sorts of things. But for the vast majority of people, the trauma in that space actually comes from what's called obstetric violence. So obstetric violence is any care provider who creates a situation where that woman is disempowered or undermined. So that could look like, an episiotomy being cut on a woman without consent. It could be not informing a woman fully of all of her choices. It could be coercion. It's often coercion, saying, well, if you don't do this now, your baby's going to die, even though that's actually not accurate information. It can be even, getting into the labor ward and being in labor, and you saying to the nurse or midwife or doctor, I'm this baby's coming, and then putting you out in the waiting room because you've only been in labor for 2 hours and it's your first baby, and that's not possible. Who could have a fast labor for their first baby, right? And then you end up birthing in the waiting room because nobody took you seriously, or they're rushing you through in those last few moments because all of a sudden there's a head-on view and everybody takes you seriously. That's obstetric violence. So there are lots of things that fall in under that, but most of the we know about 77% of birth trauma is created by obstetric violence. So that's a big number. For me, I experienced obstetric violence in my first 2 pregnancies and births.
Wow. And I assume, your experience with that is what, kind of took you down this road. So tell us a little bit about your first experience, with obstetric violence. I like that's a strong term.
It's a very strong term, and it's there's a lot of pushback about that term, but it doesn't mean just obstetricians, right? So we think obstetricians and obstetric violence, but obstetricians have the name obstetrician because they deal in obstetrics. So they are not, they get their name from the practice, and anybody who works in that space, whether that's a doula, a midwife, a labour and delivery nurse, or an obstetrician, all come in under, birth workers and can be creators of obstetric violence. So for me, that occurred with the birth of my first baby. Well, that was my first experience where I was coerced into an induction that I didn't need, and that I wasn't given full informed consent for. So I wasn't told that if I went ahead and did this intervention, that my chances of creating a baby with or getting a baby in distress was higher, that my chances of needing to have pain relief was higher, that my chances of ending in a cesarean section, which is major surgery with a newborn, was higher. So I wasn't actually given full, there was no full disclosure, and it was pitched to me in a way, and this is how it works. They pitch you what they want you to do. It was pitched to me in such a way as it wouldn't, there was no possible negative ramifications that I would just, but what ended up happening is I ended up with the full gamut. I ended up with the epidural and the cesarean section. Thankfully, my baby was never in distress, but she didn't turn around to come down. She was in a posterior position. Now, all 4 of my babies have been posterior, and my last 3 babies were born vaginally with no issue at all. But that initial experience, everything that that could be charged to my private health insurance was charged. I got the whole gamut. But it wasn't done in a way that was informed. It was done in a way that was sneaky and underhanded. And that's what got me on this path, was helping to make sure that women were and couples were educated on what these decisions actually mean and how that they could take back the power in this journey.
I love that. Because before this, I never heard of obstetrics. I think I said that correctly.
Obstetrics, yes.
Yes, I never heard. So this is good resources and knowledge to those that may be going through some of the situation and they just don't understand what they're going through. Can you, because we like to bring awareness to the audience, can you tell us some of the symptoms of obstetrics going through the process, so folks that are potentially going through this, they can say, this is what I'm going through, like they understand?
Yeah, totally. So birth trauma or perinatal trauma comes out in a variety of ways, and it's different for men and women. Let's just say that, and men and women both experience it. So if you're a dad in the room and you're watching your partner go through something that you don't understand, you can't control, you can't fix, and you don't feel confident enough to stand up for her because you're worried about the difference between, well, I don't know what I'm doing here, but she's also saying no, but then there's this person in a white coat who supposedly knows what they're doing. So how do I make it, how do I stand up for my partner, but yet make sure that she gets the care that she needs and so on. So it can actually be it can have a huge impact on the partner in the room. And so they'll often experience birth trauma, postnatal depression, those sorts of things. So postnatal depression is one of the big, labels that's put on after birth. But often postnatal depression is actually misdiagnosed birth trauma because people aren't aware of what birth trauma looks like. So on my website, I actually have a tool for you to go through and look at to determine, am I more likely to have postnatal depression or am I actually experiencing birth trauma, so that they can see some of the key differences in that. But birth trauma looks often the same as any other trauma. It will be things like not being able to sleep. It'll be flashbacks or, there's a huge amount of hypersensitivity to your environment. So becoming OCD or a perfectionist, being hypervigilant over the child. So, more than a normal sort of parent-child relationship, it will be very micromanaging. There's a lot of helicopter parenting that goes on. Any slight, pink cheeks, being slightly cold or being slightly hot or anything will have them off to the doctors, worried that there's an issue with their child, even though those may in fact be just normal, perfect things. But they're not able to necessarily tap into their intuition about their child and their child's welfare, and instead they go to instinct, which is fear-based, and they just and because that bond is not fully there, and a lack of bond is another symptom, they won't trust themselves because they couldn't trust themselves to birth this baby. So how can they trust themselves to look after this baby? And that's one of the biggest problems with birth trauma and obstetric violence, is that the blame is often placed on the birthing woman. As opposed to the system in which she's birthing in, which is very, very often the cause of the trauma and the cause of the reason why things went pear-shaped. So I can tell you without any doubt at all, the complications I had in my first 2 births were all as a result of the obstetric staff that attended those births. In one case, it was just a midwife, and in another, it was an obstetrician. But when I birthed without that, I had no issues at all. So the problem with birth trauma is that it is often brought back to the woman as her being at fault, and then she doesn't trust herself because she couldn't birth her baby, so she doesn't trust herself in her parenting. So there's a whole bunch of stuff, but it looks like even just normal anxiety, depression, PTSD, that sort of stuff. Yeah, it's no different from any other trauma in that way.
Absolutely. Now, in those like split moments where, the doctor, something has gone wrong with the, initial birth plan, and, the doctor kind of lays the plan out and, lets you know what kind of decision you need to make. When you have the assumption here that, it's going to be time sensitive, how are you supposed to gauge their sincerity, or their, just kind of aptitude for care, in this situation, whether it's just they're coercing you, trying to get you to do something, or whether it's actually an emergency and their recommendation is key to keeping your baby and yourself alive?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And it actually starts a lot further back. One of the most important decisions you will ever make in terms of in terms of how your birth goes. So one of the biggest key indicators for whether or not you'll have a physiological birth or not is choosing the caregiver that aligns with you. So if your birth culture and what you want out of your birth is to have a planned C-section at 38 weeks, then find a caregiver whose belief in birth is the same. But if your belief in birth is that it's a normal, natural event, a physiological event that doesn't need any intervention 95 to 98% of the time, then you need to find a caregiver whose belief is like that too. Because when shit hits the fan, you need to be able to trust that care provider and know that they are aligned with your philosophy, and not you to them, but them to you, that you have found the right person to walk you and guide you through this. So there's no point in having an obstetrician with a 70% cesarean section rate. If you choose that obstetrician, but your ideal birth is to be at home in the water, doing it yourself and catching your own baby, then you've got Buckley's. You will be disappointed. It will not happen. And if it does, it's probably because you got there too late, and and it just happened outside of that. Equally, if you pick a home birth midwife and you want a cesarean section for your birth, that's not going to work, right? So we actually need to be picking the right kind of care provider right at the get-go. And a lot of the coaching work that I do is working with couples pre-pregnancy or early in the pregnancy around what are their beliefs around birth, what do they want or not want in terms of the birthing experience, because the birthing experience, whilst it's only one day, just as much as your wedding is only one day, it does actually set the scene for how you parent in a way that the right wedding doesn't set the scene for how you go forward in your marriage. You can have major mistakes on a wedding day, and it doesn't actually impact your relationship because it is a one-day party. Whereas the birth of a child can have major implications psychologically as well as physically that impact bonding between partner and child and mum and all of those other things. It can make a huge impact on how breastfeeding happens. So there's a lot of repercussions from birth trauma that aren't there for other major events in our life, but we're not putting a lot of effort into determining what that looks like. We plan for months and years for our weddings sometimes to get exactly the right things, and we're not putting anywhere near the same kind of effort into learning and understanding birth culture, parenting. Most people aren't even looking at, well, what kind of parent do I want to be? What are my values? And having those discussions with their partners prior. So a lot of the work I do is about doing that work early, understanding and getting the education so that you know what it is that you want. You pick the care provider who aligns with that. And then in that moment, when it is time sensitive, you're not having to doubt that person. So that's the ideal situation. In a not ideal situation, it's about having enough information and being able to ask the right questions. So we use an acronym called BRAND, which is asking, these are the questions to ask. Benefits. What's the benefit of me doing it that way? What are the risks? So R is risks. What are the risks if I do that? What are the alternatives available to me if I don't want to do that? What if I do nothing at all? What if I just leave it be? What's going to happen then, or what might happen then, and then make a decision? So if you follow the BRAND, BRAND, benefits, risks, alternatives, what if I do nothing, and then decision, you will find yourself with a far better idea of what your options and alternatives are and exactly what's involved in that. Now, that doesn't guarantee they're going to tell you everything. And that's where having a doula makes a big difference, because they can simply being there sometimes gives you, because there's a witness to what you're being told and not being told, you tend to get more information. But those would be my hot tips.
Awesome. I want to ask, you gave us a lot of information today already. I love it. And I'm ready to keep going, because I seen in a piece that you had wrote, one of the coming up on the snip, you seen it in the intro, is that there are women become suicidal from the prenatal trauma. So I wanted to ask, was one of your symptoms, did you become suicidal? Was that part of the push, or is this resources? And what are ways to help women through that suicidal piece of the trauma?
Look, for me, no, I didn't. But the research is pretty clear. So in America, it's actually the second highest killer of women in the postnatal year. So over everything else. So, when we're talking about postnatal risks, which include infection and blood loss and things like that, so any risk associated post-birth, suicide is the second top killer of women in the States in that first postnatal year. In Australia and other places, it's about the third. And the interesting thing is, we're not talking about this. People don't understand these statistics. What can we do? Well, first of all, we can stop saying, oh, that's just part of birth. Having, everybody has a shitty experience, and you've got a healthy baby, so you just need to get on with it and get over it. That is not helpful. It's not useful. What it actually does is says, your feelings are not important. Now they also get the message, you're not grateful for having a healthy baby, which makes them feel even worse and guilty. And they're told that their feelings don't matter, and that as a person, they're no longer important, that their child is the most important thing, and that they need to just get on with it so that they can, be a good mother. And a lot of this actually comes back. So I have a sociology major, and when we think about that from a sociological perspective, that comes from culture. It comes from the way that we perceive caregivers in our culture, and it's not good. Anyone who's a caregiver, and this includes nurses and other professional caregivers as well, they're not perceived to be important. And we don't look after those who look after our elderly very well. We don't care, we don't, and certainly in your country, teachers aren't paid very well. Like anybody who's caring for young people or old people is not reimbursed in a way that would suggest that we value that. So it starts with that in terms of our cultural reaction to birth trauma. But most women who experience birth trauma will actually have experienced other trauma prior to that. And so in a lot of ways, the birth trauma will be like the nail in the coffin. It'll be the thing that bursts their already overfull bubble or balloon that they're just trying to hold everything together, and it becomes too much. So especially when there are so many hormonal and physiological interactions that occur within a body, and then add sleep deprivation, right? Sleep deprivation, there's an incredible book out there called Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker, and I'm currently reading it because it's a required reading for my sleep coaching certification. But it's fascinating, and he talks about the fact that when we are sleep deprived, we can exhibit the same symptoms as ADHD, bipolar, all sorts of different things, but we become unstable emotionally. So if we are trying to overcome a major physical event, a major psychological event, and we're doing it with a tiny new human who needs us, often without a support system and with a lack of sleep, we're asking for the near impossible. And so my preference is to work with couples before they even have a baby, so that whatever they experience during the birth of their baby doesn't leave traumatic scars. So they've got an empty balloon, all of their previous trauma, because let's face it, nobody gets to birthing a baby without having had trauma in their own childhood or their own life in some way, shape, or form. There's no unicorns. We've all had shit happen. So if we can clear the shit before we get into the birth space and the parenting space, then we actually have the capacity to manage and resolve and heal whatever does happen on the day. And we can face the sleeplessness and all of that other stuff with being much more resourced and much healthier to begin with. So as a society, we need to think about how are we supporting new mums? What are we doing to make sure that they have the support network around them to be able to function and to heal and to be able to care for themselves and a child? Because right now we're so segregated and we're so put into these little pockets. Nobody's living in a community. Nobody has a resource. When I say nobody, I have one here. I have my mum and my daughter and my granddaughter. There's 3 generations here, and my auntie. Like we have a space where we can all support each other, which is beautiful. But most people don't have that, and I certainly didn't when I had my first child. I didn't have anybody, so I was on my own with my husband, and he was working, crazy hours. So we need to be supporting these mums far better, and that actually comes back to ultimately other mums, and the older women in our culture who can give of that time. We often have this mismatch in resources and times. And if you go back 200-300 years, the older women who weren't out working in the field or weren't cooking the meals were caring for young children. They were teaching them to knit or, doing other things with those children. And we've lost that. We've actually lost. We talk about a village, it takes a village to raise a child, but it actually does. And it takes a village to support a mother so that she can also be a participant but also have the space to self-care, because that's not about, bubble baths and getting your nails done. True self-care is about being able to sleep and do the emotional work that is required for us to then show up as a parent the way we want to parent, which is usually, for the vast majority of people, they want to parent from a place of love and compassion and intuition. But if you're too full to be able to do that, if your bubble is about to burst because you've got so much shit in there, then you can't parent the way you want to because your internal dialogue is too bad. rant over.
Spot on. Spot on. Now, you've explained to us that, the obstetric violence, any trauma that you're experiencing, in regard to being pregnant, may translate over to, your mental state postpartum. In any of your, research or any teaching show that those items also affect the child itself?
Yeah, look, we do see. So there's a law of physics called the law of entrainment. And the law of entrainment says that if it's also called the law of harmony. If you put a whole bunch of grandfather clocks in a room together, pendulums swinging at different times, you can go away for a few hours and come back, and all of the pendulums will be swinging in unison. They will sync together. And we know this when we have a bunch of women living together. They'll often cycle together. My poor husband lives with 5 women in his house, so everybody cycles together. It's a crazy time, but we know that happens. It's a law of physics. It cannot be overwritten. So when you have a mum who's anxious, and we've all probably had this, right? I remember back when my sister had her first baby, I was almost due to have my 4th child, and she came over one day. She said she won't stop crying. She just won't stop crying, and I don't know what to do. And I said, will you give it to me? And I held this baby, and within a minute she was asleep. And that, of course, made my sister feel worse. She's like, well, what am I doing wrong? I mean, you're not doing anything wrong. You're just stressed. And that baby can feel the stress. So if there is energy in the room, if I am stressed as a mother, and my husband used to come home from work and I'd give him the baby and the baby would just fall asleep, and I'd say to him, it's because you're boring. They fall asleep with you because they're boring. You're boring, but they won't fall asleep with me because I'm too fun. And that wasn't the truth. The truth was he hadn't been with children all day. And so when he came, his energy was low and dropped, and he was a grounded, safe space for them to come to settle into and to align with. So one of the very first things I teach the parents that I work with, or the would-be parents, and I teach this to doulas and other birth workers, is about dropping the energy down. And actually, because it changes your own emotional state, but if we drop our energy down, we can actually create a safe place for the baby to entrain to, so that their energy is safe and low and not heightened. And anybody who's ever had a 2-year-old come running into the room who's screaming and got heightened energy will know that it's really easy for anybody to escalate to them. But generally speaking, they're actually feeding off of us as mums. So if we are not okay, then the rest of our house is not okay. And so it does impact our children. It impacts them in lots of ways. There's studies out there that show that if there's a high stress environment at home, children are more likely to have asthma. So that's just one aspect of what can happen. But we have all these children with ADHD. We have all these children who can't regulate because their parents can't regulate. So there's no co-regulation happening for them. So we've got children who have lots of behavioral disorders and so on, often because their own state of being is so dysregulated, they're all over the shop because there's nobody in the home with a safe energy for them to regulate to. And that's because that trauma impacts us so much that we then pass that along. So they're just a couple of the things that occur, but that cycle then perpetuates, right? It just goes round and round and round as nobody knows how to do this thing.
You know what? You said something very interesting, and I didn't even realize it, because I used to have really high energy, and once my energy changed in my household, my entire household changed. And I never thought about it like what you just said, like just bringing it back, like the energy or the vibe that a parent may throw off or disengage with their child may reflect off of the parent. But I guess there's situations where we just may have the child that's colicky, that would be something like totally different?
Yes.
Or would it be the same, like, calm method with a colicky baby?
Well, it's not going to hurt, is it? So when we have babies who are medically unwell, then if we can provide that dropped safe energy, then we're not adding to their problem. We're
Mm-hmm.
not adding a dysregulated system as well. And it's interesting what you say, the not being aware. I gave a talk yesterday and we talked about the fact that mothers, and again, this is biological. So it's not like I'm heaping more guilt or responsibility onto mothers, but in our homes, mothers set the tone for the energy, and all men know this. All men know that the woman's mood dictates the mood of the whole house, right? And men know, and our children know, but as mothers and as women, we don't recognize it. We just think we're managing everybody else, right? And we're not. We're actually dictating how that goes. And if we're not okay, they're not okay. But you know what? We don't put our own mask on first. We don't do the self-care that we need to do in order to make sure we're okay. And we're actually harming the people we care about most because we're twisted in the idea. And I get it. I totally get it. I've sat on the plane with 4 young children, and the plane, the hostess has said, put your own oxygen mask on first. And my entire physiology has said, fuck no, I'm going to look after my kids first. But let's think about that, right? Why do I feel like that? And what if I only get through 2 of my children before I pass out and can't help the other 2? Have I done my job properly? No, I haven't. I actually haven't prioritized their long-term well-being because I've under-prioritized my own well-being. And so as a culture, we need to get to the point where as mothers, we prioritize our own well-being. And I'm not talking about going and, buying stuff and doing retail therapy. And I'm not talking about going and having a pedicure or getting your eyelashes done and that sort of shit. That's surface level stuff. What I'm talking about is having the space and the capacity to do the work required, to sit in self-reflection, to have moments of mindfulness, to be able to, do our own emotional work and have a massage or sit in a bubble bath if that's what it looks like for us. But to be able to say, Dal, you've got the kids this Saturday morning because I'm going to go and get a massage, or I'm going to go to see my therapist on Thursday afternoon. You've got the kids. And just making it happen and not feeling guilty about doing that. And, sometimes it can just even be about spending time with the women in your life. When my kids were little, I had the most amazing group of friends, and we would do yummy mummy nights. So once a month we'd go out, all of us, and we'd have a yummy mummy night. And we might do anything from laser tag to watch a movie to just have dinner together. But we spent time together and we made it a priority to just have that time out with each other. And if even we had a number of single mums in that, we just made it happen so that we could all go out and spend time together. So having those, doing those things without guilt, and as a society, we need to stop guilting mothers about doing the self-care stuff. So, it's a culture change that needs to happen. And it's bigger than any one person, but it starts with one person. It starts with one person saying it and another person enacting it, and then the next one and the next one. And we can change culture that way. We just have to start.
Absolutely agree. What did I want to ask? We didn't really, or I could be mistaken. Did we go into the details of your second kind of mishap, with your birth plan? I don't know if you gave us any details about that one.
Oh, yeah, no, I didn't. So the second one, I had been on a journey. I'd become a doula in order to have a better experience. And I did have a vaginal birth after my cesarean. So I had a VBAC, which in lots of ways was it gave me a lot of confidence back. But the problem with that birth and with the pregnancy was it was a huge fight. I had to fight every step of the way to be given to be seen as the autonomous responsibility provider for my body. So it actually took, I had to fight the whole way to get them to just have their hands off my birth. And ultimately, when I got to the hospital, the midwife that was there had a problem with doulas. She had a problem with me because I was affecting change in the community, getting a birth centre built for Townsville. And so her issue with me meant that the way she treated me and the things that she did impacted my birth and my baby. And, I ended up with a second-degree tear and a 1,500 mil bleed, none of which happened, I might add, with my bigger baby that I birthed at home on my own with just my husband and a couple of girlfriends. Which was my third baby. So the things that she did and the fights that I had to, so I felt like I was on, and this is common for women who want to have a VBAC or vaginal birth after cesarean. They often have to fight the care providers to be heard. They have to fight for the chance to have support in the decisions that they're making. So yeah, that was even though it was it wasn't surgery that second time, there was still aspects of that were not okay, including my baby being taken away for no reason.
Oh, wow. So I want to ask, through that experience of the care provider making it hard, I guess the trauma was worse than the first pregnancy. How did you realize that you were going through the same situation, and how did you cope with those traumas? Because this time you stood up, which I know made you feel more empowered, but going through after the pain of that, I can only imagine.
Yeah, it's really interesting that as humans, we tend to mitigate our own trauma very well. We tend to minimize it and not really look at it. So whilst I recognized that I couldn't trust them, I couldn't go there for my next baby, I knew that it was not going to be an option for me to birth there again. I didn't actually recognize it as trauma until much, much later. I'm talking, over a decade later, I was actually able to unpack that. So I didn't recognize it as trauma initially. I recognized it as not acceptable, and that I wasn't going to ever put myself in that position again. But there wasn't a willingness on my behalf to really analyze it fully at that time. So it actually took a long time for me to get to a point where I was prepared to do that, because in some ways it was a confidence boosting experience, but that confidence that I gained from that also then boosted me into having the confidence to do the free birth and to do that by myself. And look, then the next birth after that, I got a midwife for. I found, because there wasn't any midwives in Townsville who were doing home births, so the next time I birthed, I found a travelling male midwife from Scotland who attended that birth, and he was perfect for that space, partly because he trusted me so much that he was, happy to sit in the kitchen and drink tea and eat biscuits and just come when I needed him, which really was actually after I'd had the baby. So it was I've done the whole lot, but what we don't do is actually sit and think about how we feel about a certain situation. We don't actually give it names because we're scared of what the names might bring. We're scared of what the labels might bring, and then we're scared to have to do the work. And I got to 16 years post my first baby before my adrenals packed it in and said, no way, we're not doing this anymore. You have to heal. Otherwise, we're not coming back online. And so I had to do the work.
Right. Now, before Demetria asks her last question, I do want to ask if, let's say you are one of these women that have literally everything mapped out to a T, but sometimes, your chosen provider is not available, and they have to call it audible. Um, I guess what would be your, best suggestion for those in that situation, to ensure some semblance of their birth plan can, stay in place and they still can feel secure, about what's going on.
Yeah, so if your regular care provider isn't going to be available and you don't have a good relationship with the other one, stay home as long as you possibly can. Don't be in that environment any more than you need to. Have a doula if you can have a doula. Um, be as educated as you possibly can be. Make sure that your partner is educated and on the same page, whoever that might be, whether that's your mum. At my daughter's birth, I was her birthing partner. So, whoever that is needs to be on the same page as you so that they can help advocate for you. Because in that time when you're birthing, you're supposed to be open, vulnerable, and in your, in a liminal state. You're not actually even in the same space. So, no, get yourself educated before for the just in case. Don't assume that, your care provider is going to be there and that everything will be fine because you did that, because you picked that. You need to be educated and you need to have a birth plan. And that birth plan needs to say how you choose it to go. And then don't put yourself in a position where they have power over you, but understand why you're going to a hospital. If you're going to a hospital, it's because you want support, right? But understand what you want support for.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're almost at time. There's two things before we close it out. I would like to ask, can you give advice to the audience or someone that's going through eccentrics, right? I said it right.
Obstetric.
Eccentric. I keep getting it wrong. I'm close, so I feel good. I'm close because sometimes I have issues pronouncing words, but we're close. Eccentrics. Um, give them some advice on how to get through the challenges or something that helped you heal through those traumas.
Yeah, so if you've experienced obstetric violence, jump on my website even and just download the resource that's there. There's a resource about knowing the difference between postnatal depression and birth trauma. So that's a really useful one to help you figure out what you're actually feeling. The other one is a resource saying 10, it's a letter to you, 10 things you need to know about, if you've been the victim of obstetric violence. And then work with somebody who has, so you need to work with somebody who has an understanding of birth trauma, not just psychology. So and we are as rare as hen's teeth because not many people have the ability to deal with trauma as a mental health therapist and have a detailed understanding of obstetric violence and the culture around birth and what impact that can have. So do find the right people, and there's some videos. There's a couple of really good videos on my website under the trauma tabs, which will explain, what's going on in your body, and how your childhood trauma may be contributing to that as well. And then the process that I use when I'm working with people to overcome it. It is also explained they're very short videos. They're less than 10 minutes each. So I would jump on there and just get some understanding of what's happening for you.
Absolutely. So we have come to our point of our show that we call Shameless Plug. You see all of your information scrolling across the bottom here. Please let the viewers know how they can contact you, how they can utilize your services, anything you have for sale, anything you want to draw traction to, causes you want to promote. You have the floor.
Oh, well, thank you. So probably the easiest way is to jump on my my website, which is fantasticfuture.com.au. You can book a strategy session in there with me. That's a 30-minute free call, and we can talk about what your needs are and how I might be able to help you. I have an incredible app called Thrive for Fantastic Futures, which I'm continuing to build out with resources. There's also a couple of programs that I have. So one of those is birth after cesarean. So it's next birth after cesarean for partners. So it's a course to teach the partners how to be on the same page and what they need to know for both repeat cesarean section and a VBAC to be able to support their woman to have the birth that she's looking for and be a good pre, during, and post-birth partner. And I have a parenting course called From Overwhelmed to Empowered Parenting Program. It's a 12-module self-paced course that you can work your way through as well. So there's some great stuff there. And I'm more than happy to jump on a phone call, which you can book on the website. And if you just want to learn more, then jump on my socials and follow along. I've put lots of content on there designed to help you understand and learn.
All right. And you have it there. We want to thank you, Philippa. You brought a lot of informative resources just now because you just educated me on something new that I did not know about. And to be honest with you, I think I was probably going through the same thing because I had the C-sections and I had a C-section and I had rough pregnancy. So, yeah. I guess I wasn't going crazy.
No, but isn't that funny that was what that would be something you would think rather than saying what happened to me. We internalize it, right? And we blame ourselves and we question ourselves.
Yeah. This was really good information. And we want to thank you so much. It was an honor to have you as a guest on Unfiltered Unspoken Podcast. So we want to thank you.
Well, thank you for having me.
My pleasure. So audience, if you heard it today, there is some aesthetics.
Obstetric violence.
Obstetrics. I'm forgetting the B. Why did I hear obstetrics? Okay.
Demetria, so when you say you have an OBGYN, OB is obstetrics.
Yeah, okay. Oh, obstetrics. Okay. I kept saying I don't know why I was saying that. Oh God. Obstetrics. Okay. And y'all have corrected me the whole entire time. So obstetrics, like OBGYN. I got it right now, right? Okay. So if there is a trauma for mothers that are struggling and men, you kept it really real that women distinguish the energy in the household. And you pulled something out of me today, just paying attention. And I noticed when my energy changed that my whole household changed. So I think I want to thank you for bringing that information because it was some really good resources. So I hope for everyone out there in the audience that you paid attention to this fabulous information, especially women that are controlling households. Just listen, your mood makes the whole entire household. So if you're acting not so nice, you're going to distinguish the mood in the household. And you heard it today right here on Unfiltered Unspoken Podcast. And I think some of y'all should reach out to Philippa because she may be a wonderful resource to a whole lot of us. So we want to thank you for tuning in. Have a blessed day.